Welcome to Perspectives, a podcast by Essence Learning LLC, and a place where leaders learn from leaders. Let's join today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Essence Learning Perspective podcast, where we bring you advice, tips, and education for leaders by leaders. I'm so excited today because this podcast is going to be featuring our Essence Learning staff, and I'm excited to talk about the subject, leading by influence to make an impact. So joining us for our podcast today, of course, we have co-hosting with me, Dr. Jeanie Murphy. Dr. Murphy, how are you today?
Super fantastic. How are you?
I am doing great. It's always good to see your smiling face.
Thank you. Same here.
Yes. And then also joining us as a guest to talk about this subject, we have our fearless CEO, Valerie Wilson. Valerie, how are you?
I'm doing good, Kiki. Hi, Jeanie.
Good evening.
So, great, yes. And so our subject today, we're going to be talking about an article that was released in our Perspectives newsletter titled Leading by Influence to Make an Impact, written by one of our Essence Learning staff members, Mindy Spiegel. And we hope as listeners you have a chance to read our Perspectives newsletter. If you don't, you can always sign up to get that at essencelearning.net. There's some great articles out there to help you with your leadership skills, right, girls?
Amazing.
That's a great article. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it and let's talk about leading by influence. So with that article, we discovered really how to transform leaders into influencers. And we're grateful to have Valerie here today because, of course, Essence Learning has a great training series called The Power of Influence, which directly ties into how you make an impact. So we're going to be talking about the ability to affect behaviors and beliefs while providing listeners with empowering tools to help influence the lives of others, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Jeanie because I know Jeanie has a great first question to ask you in regards to this subject.
Well, thank you kindly. Thank you. We have a lot of questions to ask, of course. But before I actually lean in to ask questions specific about the article, I just want you to share with us, what is one specific aha that you have learned over the years in your role as a leader?
Well, as it relates to influence, I mean, there's a lot of ahas, and I've been leading for a long, long time. I won't tell the age, right? But when you start to think about what is the greatest impact of being a leader, it really is influence in all sincerity. Because if you don't have influence, you're not really able to help people to change the way they think, to change the way they behave, to kind of, have an alternative perspective, right? This is what this is all about. So influence helps. If you think about the power of a leader to be able to influence someone's character or behaviors or the way that they think, that's pretty powerful. And so when we think about that as our responsibility as a leader, that to me, when that consciousness came, that I have that impact on someone, that became probably one of the greatest points of my life as a leader. Wow, I have the impact, the power to impact someone's life. And I need to take that intentionally and be purposeful about it. So that's where my shift became from being just a manager to a leader.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I think we all have had our aha moments, and it's so amazing to hear your story.
Yeah.
For you to just to give us a little bit of insight on just your journey and how you have come to where you are today. So we appreciate that, and we thank you sincerely just for being authentic and showing up for this podcast and this event, and to share with everyone across the world, the aha moment of the influence and the power and the impact. Just very genuine. And thank you so much for sharing that.
When you think about Jeanie, and when you think about Kiki, when you think about when did you really start to think about when did I start influencing? When did I learn about influence? I thought back to my mom, and she used to always say, "Hey, your brother's watching you." I was 10 years old. He's watching what you're doing. He's gonna, he's influencing. You'll influence the way that he thinks and the way that he behaves. And so as I became a leader, that didn't check in right then at 10 that I had the power of influence. But when I became a leader, I started to say, when did I start to understand influence? And then I understood that everybody has influence. You have influence, everybody has influence. It's when we check into it and become conscious about it that it has its power. So, if you think about when did you start influencing people around you, your neighbors, your community, your coworkers, your boss, so as we all have that power to influence someone.
That's so
We
true.
gotta take responsibility for it though.
So true. I like the point, and Kiki, you may want to step in and share, but I like the point that you just shared about checking in. And often in leadership roles, we may check in or we may check out.
Right.
And in some instances, we may intentionally check out because the culture within the organization or the situation just may be too much for us to handle. And so, speaking of just checking in and checking out, Kiki, I would be remiss if I didn't ask for your experience with one opportunity where you had to check in and then check out.
That's a really good question. And me being very new to leadership and being new to executive leadership, I think I have learned through my journey what the definition of check-in and check-out is, right? And especially checking in when you're seen as an influential leader to others. How do you check in with those that you're leading to ensure that you're doing the right thing and you're making an impact through your influence and the words that you're saying and the power of what you're doing from a strategic standpoint? How does that play a part with checking in? And then, having to check out by also providing some trust to those so that they can carry forward and do that too. So I very much have learned that, leaning in towards that tension, checking out, making sure that there's trust and respect there so that you do have the capabilities to check out. Because I think we sometimes become overworked and tired by trying so hard to make an influence with others.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest, if you have, if you can check out, if you're really committed to the leadership role and you have to find that way to connect yourself back. When you find that things are burdening you or that you're having trouble, then you need to connect with someone that has influence over you. So, we want to make sure that we stay connected. So if in fact you feel like I'm having a rough time staying connected or checking in, then you need to go who can influence you,
Yes.
who can help your mindset. So
Right.
we have to stay connected with one another.
Yes.
So when those times come, we don't really have a choice. If you have people watching you and you have people who are really depending upon you as a leader and you're in front,
Yeah.
you really don't have that option, right? To check in and check out. So we have to be able to connect with one another and develop that mutual respect for each other and be able to, say, you have an impact on me, here's where I am. That transparency you talked about, we have to be able to do that as leaders. Otherwise, we've got to be responsible for those folks who we are actually accountable for leading. And that's the other thing, that we have to take ownership and responsibility for that. And so it takes courage and strength and all of those things, but that's where that connection comes from, us connecting with one another. One of the things I like to bring up about leadership and being influential is I think that one of the things that we want to think about is we want to make sure that we've gotten permission to lead, right? We want to make sure that the people that we're influencing, that we think we're influencing, that we want to influence, that they really want to be influenced by us. As otherwise, if you don't seek permission, you're going to be viewed as nosy. Who asked you? What was your opinion? Even though I can look and say, oh, I have something to add to this situation, I think that I can influence the results and the behavior. Nobody asked you. I'm not prepared for it. So even in your leadership, one of the things you want to know is you want to recognize that you have that power, that responsibility, and own it. But then you want to make sure that you're connecting with people so that you can stay strong within your stance.
Yes.
And then you want to ask permission to lead. We talk about managers and leaders and all of that. They have the authority. But how many of us have worked for someone who has authority over you? Like, you say what you want to say.
Right.
Do what you want to do. But
It was
that's
just
not-
a title.
Yeah.
Just a title.
So they have the authority to be your boss or your manager or your leader. But yet and still, if you haven't given them permission to lead you, to tap into your skills or tap into your development or tap into your mindset, you won't follow them. So influence also, we have to say, hey, I want to sit down and talk with you. Here's where I think I can help. Here's where I need your help. Build that relationship, because if you don't have that, you really aren't influencing anyone. You're just really being authoritative or dictating something. So
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think there's a thin line between influence, right, and then people seeing it as holding power over others, and that makes people very resistant.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give to leaders out there who have someone on their team that maybe is resistant to change or resistant to that influence because they're set in some traditional ways of thinking?
Great
Good
question.
question, yeah. One of the things that I would recommend first before you try to talk to someone about their resistance is to really check yourself. First, kind of understand yourself and what you have to offer, and why are they resisting that from you or anyone around them. So the idea that when you come to someone who's in a resistance, you're coming to them with, here's how I can help, here's where I can't help, but here's where I show that I can influence the results, or I can influence the way that things are happening for you. I could be a coach, your mentor, whatever way that you want to influence them. But you want to make sure that you can be there 100%, because that checking in, checking out thing we talked about a little earlier doesn't work for somebody who's already resistant. So once they've decided, you know what, I know who you are, and I have been transparent, then I have to know what my realm of influence is. I can't influence everything about that person, and so they may be resisting something that I don't have an influence over. So I need to know myself, and I need to know what realm of influence I have. And again, I have to ask for permission. Here's how I want to support. Here's where I need your support. How do we build a relationship around that? So that resistance you don't attack the resistance as much as you try to build a relationship. You talked about trust, Kiki. You talked about identifying where we connect, and so that's where you start. And then the resistance starts to go down. The barriers that you start to attack those barriers that are there because they may not hear you, trust you, or understand you. So it starts with you.
Yeah.
It starts with understanding what you could do. Starts understanding the realm of influence that you have, and then it starts to, hey, tell me about those. Here's where I think I can help. Do I have your permission? And then once that starts, those barriers will go down. They aren't resisting anymore to you, and then together you guys can decide how to overcome the change that needs to happen.
I agree. And I would like to pivot, if I may. We have had some interesting feedback from our Essence followers on the article. Great questions, and there are a few questions that I want to share with you two ladies this evening. Great segue into checking in, checking out, knowing that we need to show up. I'm just kind of summarizing some of the points and making sure that we're asking permission. So with that question, or with that comment, I would like to ask the question, what are some ways that leaders can inspire in the workplace? Because we're talking about, asking permission. And I think it's really easy for us to talk today. We work together. We are in a workplace session, although we are now doing this podcast. So in the workplace, it may be difficult at times because you have various layers of leadership. You may not feel 100% comfortable going to your leader who has the title to say, you didn't get my permission to lead. Or I don't want to give you permission to lead me. So if there's anything that we can maybe talk about just a few moments on that level, I think that may share a different perspective for those listening today.
So are you asking how, as a leader, we inspire others to follow us, or Absolutely. Are you asking, okay. Well, the one of the things that as I was going through the thought process here, what it is to be an influencer, I started to think, who influenced me? And so I didn't have a coach at any time in my career. I never had a mentor. I just didn't have that coming up. So one of the things that kind of hit home for me was I had to be my own inspiration, right? I had to be that leader that others would follow. I had to be the leader that I would follow. So what were the characteristics of that? What would inspire me? And those are the characteristics or the skills and the knowledge that I sought after to develop myself, to become a better leader, because I wanted to make sure that if I don't want to follow you. How do I overcome that? How do I become that leader that I wouldn't hear that? There were times where, particularly as I was coming up, that I found leaders who I liked their approach. You know, I liked their skills, the way that they spoke, the way that they motivated. So I picked and choose, right? So I think that as leaders coming up, and we're trying to identify who we are and how we are as a leader, find those characteristics from the leaders that really you do like, that inspires you, and then take on those. You know, some of those things you gotta learn how to do, you gotta be better at, you gotta be more intentional and purposeful. I'll say that 1,000 more times, I think. But that's really what I think our upcoming leaders really need to identify, because there's no one person. You know, you're gonna take something from Kiki, you're gonna take something from Jeanie, and I'm gonna take my own, and then I'm gonna be that leader that I would follow. And that keeps me, keeps me inspired. So I look at others and I say that I can adopt. You know, that's a style I like. Oh, I would enjoy if I could do that. Let me figure out how to be stronger in this area. And so I'm always looking for ways to learn and develop and to grow. And that's another tip I'd say. You got to always look for that. How can I be better? How can I grow? And don't rest in our laurels, right? So I think that's part of, in my opinion, one of the things that we've really got to do. Learn and grow, obviously, but then seek to be that leader that you would want to follow. Take on that role,
Yeah, I love when you say learn, develop, and grow, because I feel like that's something that just does not end, right? We always have to work on learning and developing new skills, and as society changes, things in life change, and we always have to grow with that as well. Can you talk to us, speaking of learning and growing, I know we have a great class called The Power of Influence. Can you talk to the listeners today about that class? What are some of the things that they will learn and develop and grow on with that course?
A lot of the tips that we just talked about, those tips are elaborated on, how, when to some of the questions that Jeanie was just asking, how as a leader do I grow in this space, and then how do I help others become an influential leader? So it has both of those components in it in terms of how do I become a more effective leader, more influential. And then how do I use that power for good, to make sure that I am that person that others want to follow. But then how do I help others in this space become influential? How do I help lead them into that so that they feel that they're growing as leaders? And so again, I'm a certified coach through John Maxwell, and he has a course about influence. And in that training, he says, a leader and influence are the same thing. You can't be a leader without influence, right? So you could interchangeably use the word leader and influence in the way that he was speaking. And the more I think about that, the more I think, well, what are you if you're not an influencer? If
Great question.
You're not a leader. If you say I'm a leader and you're not an influencer, there's that gap that you've got. So that part of power of influence helps you to bridge that gap, to recognize yourself as an influence, take ownership of being an influencer, and then identify what are those things that I need to learn, grow in order to be more influential, so that people see me and respect that. And part of that is, to Kiki's point, learning in this space. As things change, I need to be relevant, right? So you can't be, talking about the good old days when we're trying to lead and influence people that are just coming into the workplace.
Because definitely relevancy is a huge part of that, of continuing to grow as well. And I want to also ask Jeanie a question about what influences her as well, because you're very resilient, and being a doctor of scholastic and academic subjects, what really influences you as a leader, being in different fields?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not a one-point answer to share with you. I think for me, and in my experience, I'm still growing as a leader. And to Valerie's point, I have to pull on the strengths of the leaders around me to show up and ensure that I'm always on point to be the person that I would want to be led by. And I'll tell you, the influence comes from leaders that are respected and that I respect. And so,
Right.
of course, we have the Essence of Respect training module. So, followers, visit our website to view the description on that training. But I'll tell you honestly, the respect is what keeps me very disciplined and conditioned to check my biases, to make sure that I'm showing up authentically. And when I don't know, to be honest and say, that's a great question, I don't know the answer. And I'll admit that, because no one wants to be perceived as, being dishonest.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the influence and the impact for those in my life are always showing up very authentic and transparent and just very honorable. And I've had many amazing leaders, from family to friends to coworkers. So very diverse, different walks of life, different age groups, and it's all about lifelong learning. And it doesn't stop, and you mentioned that earlier.
Right.
And I want to learn, and I want to really be that leader that can make a difference. So that's what we're talking about today, is the influence to make an impact. And there's an old saying, when we come to this earth and we leave this earth, you have your born date, right, and your end date, and the dash in between. What contribution have you offered to the world, to the space? We want to show up to say, I was here.
Jeanie, that's a great point when you think about that dash.
That dash.
And leaving the power of influence, that once you leave, that dash really doesn't stop because you've influenced people that are still here. And so your influence lives on.
Yeah.
So I think that's another powerful. So even though there's a dash between your birth and your death, that dash, if you've left and you've influenced others, you live on. I think that's huge.
Right.
Very good point. How about you, Kiki? What's influence?
I think, and I was going to bring this up because, we are women sitting at a table right now, and influence and the way that we impact the world is huge right now, right? So being women of color, I think influence leads to that impact for younger generations as more females of color move up into executive positions, into those positions of power. I always think about, what is that impact that I want to make for those younger generations? What do I want to leave behind? What influence do I want them to take from how I'm leading, where they can continue the legacy as well? So I think that's important also, and I look for characteristics for those leaders who look like me, who talk like me, who are out there in the world making a difference, and that really inspires me to really hone in on my leadership skills and to really portray that to those who I lead, so that they are left with something to follow around and carry.
That's so true. I like your point, and thank you for sharing. For those who are coming after you, I have learned recently, it's also including those who are in the space with me now, and those who led the way.
Yeah.
And for me to be able to show up as a leader and to be recognized as a leader by multiple generations, it's a lot to take in. It is an amazing experience for someone who has been in the business for 50 plus years, to pull you to the side to give you feedback, whether good, bad, or indifferent, because they see the leadership potential in you, or the leader that you're wanting to show up to be. So,
Awesome.
Great point.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
The impact of influence, that's just huge. As we were thinking, as you were talking, both of you were talking, and you were bringing up different ways and different places that we can influence, and you targeted some. I'm targeting a certain age group, or I'm going to target a certain gender, because I know that's my realm of influence. That's where I can have the greatest impact. And I think that's important for us to understand, that that's intentional and purposeful. That you go where you can have the greatest impact. So it's not always just allowing people to come and then you figure out where I can influence, but where is my greatest strength, skill, and where am I respected? Where do I have the greatest credibility? Where can I lead the best? Finding that space is huge. So, and then you could just take off, because you got the passion already, right? So now you find the passion, and you get in there with the people. They're going to help generate, motivate you. So it just rebuilds and seeds and grows. So I think the idea that you brought that up, Kiki and Jeanie, that's awesome, that you could say, I'm targeting certain areas. Even in leadership, you don't always get to do that, right? Because you're going to have every walk, particularly if you're in an organization, either nonprofit, for-profit, wherever you're working in the community, you're not going to have that choice, right? To just target that one area. But I think if you do target that one, it helps you to understand influence better. It helps you to understand your power of influence. And then once you get that energy and that experience, that what I say to do influences others, when I connect with someone, and they respect me, you just take that back to your workplace, and that helps you to build better on and understand, that I'm gonna grow here. I'm gonna learn how to inspire and influence men.
Right.
I'm gonna learn how to inspire and influence my leader. I'm gonna manage up. So,
Right.
We've gotta, those all are important.
Right. What would you say, as you talk about leading up and managing up and, making that impact? I know that in the next couple of years, by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials and younger. So now we're going to have some new leaders who are just stepping into their leadership role, whether it be supervisor, manager, director, and so on. What is that first set of advice or tips that you would give that new leader coming in on how to really use that power of influence?
Good question.
Oh, the first tip, gosh, I think the first tip is, again, to know yourself and to know what you can influence. That's always I think that's probably my first tip with anybody, with anything, particularly a leader, is to know what you're coming into.
Mm-hmm.
So before you start to look at the people around you and whether they're old and young or whatever that dynamics are, you really need to know who you are and what you're bringing to the table and how you can influence, and then stand on that. And then as you start to try to influence behaviors, the environment, the culture, the people, whatever you're trying to influence, you'll understand based upon what you can do. And then you have to go and start connecting with others, because
Right.
Hey, I can't do it by myself, but I know this is you gotta connect. So
Yes.
I think the first thing I would say is understand yourself and know what you're capable of doing in your influence, and then start to connect with those that can help you make the changes that you think as a leader needs to be made within that organization. The second thing I would say is once you know yourself and the power of influence, then even before you connect, you really need to know the environment that you're leading. And so as millennials, understand that they're stepping into an environment that's been led by traditionalists or baby boomers.
Right.
And behind them comes another two sets of generations, right? So they're dealing with these 4 or 5 different generations of thoughts and processes. So before you start to get too much farther, you need to know what that climate is and what that makeup is. So know the mixture, the diversity mixture, obviously, and then start to connect.
Right.
So I think those things that help to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and building those relationships are huge, and also learning about how generations work together with different cultures and their intergenerations work together as well. That reminds me of Essence Learning Generational Differences course.
Yes.
Please, listeners, go out there and go to essencelearning.net to learn more about the courses that we've talked about today, such as Essence of Respect, as well as generational differences. Because with our changing generations, it's going to be huge to learn how to work together in a cohesive environment, right? So I just want to do some last question, and we'll do a kind of round table with that as well. Give us some last parting words, what you would share with our listeners about turning your influence into inspiration.
Nice.
Turning my influence into inspiration. Am I going first? I just
Of
Yes, of course, or
You notice how we
Jeanie, or
just
whoever
started
would like to go first.
yes.
Yes, because you're very inspirational.
I think what I'm going to steal from you guys, I think what you were saying initially is that you're looking for people that you trust, that to show up as their authentic self, that you can respect. So you can't inspire anyone if they don't respect you, trust you, or really think that you're authentic. Who are you? Where are you? So I think my last parting words is really where we started. You got to be authentic, you got to be trustworthy, and you've got to be own the fact that you have the power of influence and you want to use that power for good. And you've got to learn and grow within yourself over and over and remake yourself over and over again. You got to be willing to do that to be an effective influencer. So that's kind of where I think that.
Okay. Jeanie?
Wow, to come after that, I think for me, it's a great question to ask. It's to be determined in some aspects. Just listening to all of the awesome feedback that I've heard from Valerie tonight will allow me to do a self-assessment. I think I know how I show up. I want to believe that I'm showing up and I'm asking permission to lead and that I have earned the respect. But a self-assessment is important. And so my parting words would be, back to Ms. Valerie's point in regards to, okay, know who you are and what you are capable of and what value you can bring. Self-assess.
Awesome.
And I think that self-assessment will allow us to calibrate and recalibrate.
Yeah,
That's great.
That is great, because I was thinking about, Jeanie just gave me an idea. I'm gonna go home and write down characteristics of those leaders who influence, and then really circle, what are those characteristics that I feel like do well, what I need improvement on, what I need training on as well. I think that's always a great exercise to do and to reevaluate yourself. But I just want to leave with, when I think about influence and inspiration, I always think about what am I leaving behind, and the word proud. Would people be proud of what I've done? Would my parents be proud of what I've done to be a leader and to leave that inspiration behind in the world? So I always think about that. What impact am I making? Would people want to follow in some of my footsteps with the leadership skills I have?
Well, I'll definitely stop with this and say I'm very proud of both of you guys. I really are stepping into the space here. I'm excited that we're having this opportunity to share, but I don't want us to leave tonight without me saying thank you and how proud I am of where you guys have grown. Since Essence has really started, I've seen the steps that you've taken to be an influencer, to be that leader, to assess and to grow, and I'm loving it. So thank you all so much for this opportunity, but thank you all for being the leaders that you are. You do show up as leaders in both situations.
Thank you.
I am very proud.
Thank you for those words.
It's all about the leadership.
It's all about
It's
the
all-
leadership.
Yes, ma'am. We thank you.
Well, I think this comes to an end of our time. I know, me either, but I want to thank our listeners for taking an essence of your time today to listen to our Essence Learning Perspective podcast. We would love to hear information from you. So please visit essencelearning.net. There is a contact us page where you can, of course, contact us for any information or to learn about today's trainings that we've mentioned. I want to give a thank you to Jeanie as well as to Valerie for your words of inspiration today. And we hope that our listeners join us for our next podcast. So thank you, listeners.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Thank you for joining Perspectives, a podcast by Essence Learning LLC. Essence Learning is your solution to personal and professional development. We partner with our clients to develop a learning strategy that will increase productivity, enhance performance, and align with their purpose and goals. For more information, visit us online at essencelearning.net or call us at 1-877-657-5755.